Stop licking yourself, I'm picking it up on the audio. Have you ever written characters that just seem kind of flat? They're not compelling or interesting. They're not somebody that you can see yourself rooting for. It could be that their motivation is not properly established. Or maybe you just suck. Probably the first thing. Let's talk about 6 necessary things to create a good character motivation. Thing number 1, motivations are not goals. This is a common misconception, at least I think it is. Goals are tangible things that your characters want to achieve. Motivations, on the other hand, are the reasons your characters are trying to achieve those goals. If you have a story about people wandering through the desert following a plane crash, the character's goals might be to find water, or food, or shelter, or some way to get back to civilization. Their motivation for doing all these things is survival. Goals are specific things a character wants to achieve. Motivations are the underlying reasons that they want to achieve those things. Motivations can range from simply surviving a situation to achieving long-term joy and satisfaction in one's. In real life, people generally have multiple motivations that are driving them forward, which segues nicely into point 2. Number 2, motivations should be complex. Notice that I said motivations with an S, indicating that this is plural, meaning more than one. Your characters should have more than one motivation, and if possible, these motivations should be related. A character may want to be a good parent to their children, achieve success in their career, and be a good spouse, while also achieving success in their underground, no-holds-barred rock-paper-scissors competitions. Having a single motivation will create one-note characters. These characters are boring to read about and often come across as cliched. This is a problem most common with villains. Often a villain character is doing villainous things only to gain more power, whatever that means. Giving your villain multiple motivations that explain why they are seeking power will provide more context for their actions and ultimately make them more compelling to read about. It will give the reader a closer look into your villain's inner workings. Your villain may still not be likable, and that's not the goal. The goal is to make them more interesting to read about, and perhaps more relatable. The same thing applies for the rest of your characters. Giving a character, whether they're a villain or not, multiple motivations will make them more believable, and give the reader some reasons for why they behave the way that they do. Even if the way they behave doesn't fully jive with something sane people would do. Which conveniently flows into our next point. Man, it's like I planned this. Point number 3, motivations don't need to be rational. Some of the most compelling stories ever written involve people with motivations that aren't super logical. Having a character pursue something because of a trauma they've experienced that is ultimately going to lead them to self-destruction makes for an interesting read. Not a super uplifting experience, but still. The Count of Monte Cristo is a good example of this. The protagonist of that book is motivated by getting revenge on all the people responsible for him being locked in a dungeon for 14 years. He, as the reader, can see that pursuing revenge will ultimately not achieve what he genuinely needs. But we can also understand how this person's trauma and experiences have led them down this path. Part of what often makes these stories work is seeing the character come to the realization that their motivations have been misguided. In The Count of Monte Cristo, I believe this happens after the poisoning of... was it Mrs. Villefort? I think so. Been a while since I read that book. This realization is usually followed by the character's motivation changing, or the character being destroyed by the thing that they've been misguidedly chasing. Which dovetails nicely into point 5. Motivations can and should change through time. This isn't always the case, but usually motivations aren't static. They can and most of the time should change as the story progresses. This makes the characters more dynamic and allows you to show how they are being shaped by the events of the story. You may have a character realize by the result of their actions that they were misguided. Or you may have some event happen in the story that forces your character's motivation to change. It's even better if this change in motivation results in conflict. Even better than that is when I have a good transition to the next point in the list. Number 6. Motivation should create conflict. Giving a character a motivation that they can only achieve by doing something that violates their belief system is a great way to add conflict to a story. Warbreaker has an excellent example of this that I could easily remember. In that story, one of the main characters needs to rescue her sister, who has been married off to some evil king. In order to do that, she must immerse herself in a culture and magic system that is considered sinful by her own culture. This adds conflict as the character must go against their own belief system in order to pursue their motivation. Giving a character multiple motivations that conflict or motivations that result in them pursuing goals that go against their own belief system is a good way to add an extra layer of conflict into a story. Like with many aspects of a character, the more complex and intertwined and deep you can make motivations, the better. Creating motivations that are complex, dynamic, and possibly irrational, while also generating some conflict for your characters, is going to lead to more interesting and compelling stories for your novel, which I assume is the whole reason that you're watching this video, isn't it? If you enjoyed this content, consider liking and subscribing. If you like to hate watch this content, then you can dislike and subscribe, I guess.